Hello, I'm John McNamara, the retired Director of Religious Education from St. Louis to Montfort Parish in Sound Beach, and I'd like to talk to you today about the story in the book of Genesis about the Tower of Babel. Tower of Babel is a wonderful story about people who were trying to build something really, really big. It talks about kind of like our skyscrapers. They wanted to make these huge buildings. At that time, in Babylon, in the town of Babylon, in the big city of Babylon, uh, the people were building these buildings called ziggurats, which were huge, huge buildings. And so the authors of the book of Genesis are looking at that story and saying, well, how does that apply to the people? So they tell the story that kind of shows the progress of evil that we've been seeing in the book of Genesis. And what happened is they were building these buildings to sort of replace God. And so instead of their belief in God, they were putting all of their energy into making these huge buildings. And so God comes down in the story and he kind of takes a look at this and says, these people, what they're really trying to do is they're trying to replace me. They're trying to come up with something better than me. They're trying to reach up to the sky, to the heavens. They're trying to take over the whole thing. So I think what has to happen is we've got to teach them a little bit of a lesson. So what happens is they kind of are not able after a while to communicate because of the problem of languages. Initially, everything was fine. Everybody spoke the same language. Everything was wonderful. Then as the people started to move to different places and they learned different languages, they came back and they tried to build things and they couldn't communicate with one another. And so the evil had gotten to the point where there were divisions among the people. And the divisions were symbolized by language. The people really couldn't communicate with one another. So the whole project of building these beautiful buildings, these wonderful ziggurats, kind of like our skyscrapers, they just couldn't do it anymore because they couldn't communicate with one another. So they found that when they were trying to replace God, take God out of their lives, that it really didn't help them come together as one family. Instead, divisions were created, and the divisions are symbolized by the different languages. And we have a very interesting story in the New Testament, in the Christian scriptures. We find in the book of the Acts of the Apostles that on the Jewish feast of Pentecost, the Spirit came down upon the apostles, and the Spirit transformed them. Initially, they were kind of afraid. They didn't want to go out and tell people about Jesus and proclaim the gospel. They were afraid that maybe they would be arrested and put to death. But when the Spirit came upon them, that fear went away. The Spirit came upon them in forms of wind and tongues of fire, and they went out and they started to tell people about Jesus. And there were people that were gathered from different nations, different countries, which would be kind of normal. Because when the Jewish people had these big feasts, there were pilgrimages from all over the Mediterranean and different parts of Asia. People would come to celebrate in Jerusalem, where the apostles were. And so, how would they know the message? Because they all had different languages. And Pentecost is kind of the opposite of what happens at the Tower of Babel, because at Babel, all the languages get confused. But in Pentecost, each one hears the apostles in their own language. So there's kind of a healing of that division. And what Pentecost is meant to symbolize is the fact that we're all part of one family. Sort of the opposite of the Tower of Babel. Now you might ask, well, how does this story apply to us today in our own lives? Well, what it shows is that we have to try to be sensitive to all people, of all languages, of all nations, and that it's really important that we come together, and that we listen to one another, and try to communicate to one another. And of course, who was one of the greatest communicators? Father Abraham. So let's sing about our good friend, Father Abraham. Father Abraham had many friends. Many friends had Father Abraham. I am one of them, and so are you. So let's all praise the Lord. Keep on praising the Lord and have a great day.